This is the Power Break Podcast number 216, titled Prepare to Fly Away. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. What's going on with you, Bob? I understand that you've had some significant technical issues over the past couple of weeks.
I'm not a technical guy. I have to rely on everybody else's help. It's amazing how many people have ideas, what you need, but I went to the Geek Squad.
Those people know what they're doing in general, for sure.
That's a shameless plug for them. But anyway, I just want to plug also our podcast and thank everybody for listening to the Power Break Podcast, for also telling others about the podcast, and for leaving us a rating and or a review wherever you download the podcast. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it means a ton to us. And, over the past probably 3 or 4 months, 5 months, we've seen a significant uptick in the amount of people that are downloading the podcast and listening. And really, that's all you guys sharing it and giving us 5-star ratings and making it easy for people to find it. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, JT, today we're talking about preparing to fly away. What does that bring to your mind?
The sad part is it immediately brings to mind a movie where they would sing that song over and I fly away, oh Lord, I fly away. You remember that?
I thought about that.
I can't remember that, which movie that is. And by the way, I apologize to everybody for that attempt to sing. It was probably pretty awful, but hey.
Well, let me just say that
not
JT may not be a
winner.
Singer, but he is quite a guitarist, and he put together our new sounds of the podcast. And,
that's right. Yeah.
Very good stuff. So thank you very much, JT.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, from a biblical perspective, it really kind of makes me focus on being prepared always, like in expectation almost of, being prepared if God comes, if Christ comes, and just being prepared always to be able to react to what's going on around you in a biblical way that He's putting in front of you. That kind of pops in my mind as well. But I know that when you wrote the article, you have a focus that you want to go on. So what do you think?
Well, the preparing to fly away, of course, it really has to do with death. But of course, either way, we're going to meet with the Lord, and so we'll kind of fly away because when we are absent from the body, we are present with the Lord, and so we immediately go to be with Him. Those who are followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, who are children of God. The point is, when Moses makes this point in Psalm 90 about the need to be, need to consider how short and brief our lives really are, he makes a strong emphasis to prepare to fly away. Like Psalm 90 and verse 10 says, the years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. So, as I wrote the article, prepare to fly away.
Well, let's continue to talk more about that. Folks, if you haven't been over to bobbrubaker.com, I would highly suggest you head over there. At the very least, sign up for the blog so it shows up every Monday. Gets you ready for what's coming in the podcast that week. But there are also some other great resources there, books that Bob has written, and he continues to add to that library. So if you haven't been over there in a while, I would encourage you to head over there and check it out, especially since we had an update not too long ago, probably about 6 months ago on the website. So anyway, I would head over, I would check that out. And what'd you say about a shameless plug? I guess I'm done. And we're going to talk about your blog, Prepare to Fly Away.
Well, as I wrote in the blog, that in 2001, I won a trip to Russia to fly in a MiG-29. It was quite an exciting flight, of course. Prior to the flight, we were required to go through ejection seat training, so we would be prepared in the event of an ejection injection seat scenario. Well, then the pilot, they gave the instruction that the pilot would give the command to prepare to eject, which meant you pulled your knees to your chest and took hold of the handle that activated the seat ejection mode, and no further action would be required until the pilot gave the command, eject, eject, eject.
Cool.
I was glad that didn't happen when I flew in the MiG. Quite
Yeah,
frankly,
I bet you
everything, the place, around Russia, it was in March and everything was covered with snow. And I thought that would have been very devastating to be out there on that.
The first thing that popped in my mind as you were saying that was the actual. It's almost like Jesus came here and told us the same thing in a very odd way. He kind of told us to prepare to eject as well, didn't he?
He really did. He did. Yeah. And we need to be prepared for his coming. And at that point, we are going to fly away.
Prepare to eject.
Prepare to eject, yeah. Well, Moses writes in Psalm 90 about how brief life is, and so we should be prepared for it. Notice verse 10, it says, the years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, but their span is but toil and trouble, so they're soon gone, and we fly away. Now, despite the fact that God has been and is and ever shall be our dwelling place in every generation, as Moses writes in Psalm 90, our lives on this earth are just a brief moment compared to eternity. If we should live to 70 or 80 years of age, it's just a flash when you think about eternity. Other places of Scripture use analogies of mere breath, a shadow, a mist to convey how short our lives really are. Psalm 39 says, behold, you have made my days as a few handbreadths. Or also in Psalm 39, he says, man goes about as a shadow. In James chapter 4, he talks about the fact that our lives are like a mist that's here and is gone. So what's the conclusion? Moses says we should go around with this prayer that, Lord, teach us to number our days that we may get a heart to wisdom. So numbering our days is to help us be reminded of the fact that life is short, and so we need to learn to prioritize and make the most of the days. As Ephesians chapter 5 says, we're to look carefully how we ought to walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of our time because the days are evil. Specifically, Moses goes on in Psalm 90 to further instruct us as the command to prepare to eject is given to the reminder that we should soon fly away. We should then number our days, apply our hearts to wisdom, and notice his instruction is what his prayer requests for pity, mercy, satisfaction with God, and his mercy also in the joy in the Lord includes times of affliction, ability to see the hand of God and blessings as we serve the Lord to his glory. Here's what he says. Return, O Lord, how long? Have pity on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all of our days. Make us glad as our days, as you have afflicted us, and for as the years we have even seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord of our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Here's the point. We're here just for a short time. In order to make the most of it, we should be ready by being prepared to eject or fly away at any moment, and applying our hearts unto wisdom is where we'll focus, of course, upon him, his word, and do what we should be doing, including time of prayer, taking time, as we recommended in the article, to take some time to read and meditate on Psalm 90.
Yeah, it's funny because throughout Scripture you read over and over again that there's an expectation. You're to be ready, right? You're commanded to be watchful, to be watchful of Satan, to be watchful of Christ as he comes, to be watchful of the things around you. There's a seriousness that I think we have the ability to forget about unless we really focus on it. And we're going to talk a little bit later about one of the exercises that we did a couple of months ago when we were talking about Psalm 90. But I think there's a seriousness that oftentimes we lose Christ was serious about be ready. Right? Because you never know what time the coming will be. You never know what time you're going to have to act on his behalf. You never know these things, so you have to be vigilant and you have to watch.
Right. And we also don't know the time that when we would die.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think, it's funny because it's not lost on me that as you and I are talking about flying away, your camera on your device keeps flying away because all I see is your ceiling like half the time. It's like as I'm trying to watch you talk, because folks, we do this on FaceTime, and as he's talking, I don't know if the vibration is causing it to happen, but slowly you move out of the picture, and I just see your ceiling, and I'm like, Bob just flew away again.
Actually, we do this on FaceTime to communicate with each other, but we also both record on good device
separately. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So anyway, but yes, and what's happening is my setup that I have for my iPad, which you're seeing me, JT, is kind of old, and so it's held together with duct tape.
It's time to make an investment, Bob.
And the duct tape is getting old, so it doesn't stick as well.
Man, who do I see about getting this man a raise? He's using duct tape.
There you go, folks, and all the warts and all here on the Power Break podcast, talking about the duct tape. Anyway, you'll check out the blog. Of course, it is talking about preparing to fly away, and you'll find that at bobbrubaker.com.
So what else is happening, Bob? Anything new you want the listeners to know about this week?
Probably appropriate that we talk about the book that I wrote on the power of time management, just getting the most out of your day anytime. And of course, if you're preparing to fly away to be with the Lord, either by his coming or the time that we are absent from the body and present with the Lord at our death, well, it's appropriate to make the most of your time, as it says in the book of Ephesians chapter 5, that we want to make the most use of our time and apply our hearts unto wisdom. I wrote a little book about that, getting the most out of it. It's called The Power of Time Management. If you'll go to bobbrubaker.com and go to the resources at the top and then scroll through the resources to the books, and through the books you'll find it, The Power of Time Management. And while you're at bobbrubaker.com, check out the sermon links of the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida. At the moment, we're right back in the book of 1 Peter where we left off last spring when we took our summer series in Psalms break. But here we are, back in 1 Peter. Good stuff you can check out at bobbrubaker.com. The sermon links, The Power of Time Management, and other books, check it out. It's all at bobbrubaker.com.
This is the Power Break Podcast. I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or for Bob, feel free to email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering those questions on an upcoming Power Break podcast. But I'll also add, if you are a telemarketer of some kind, or if you are trying to sell me an insurance policy for my vehicle or an extended warranty, I'm not interested, neither is Bob. Anyway. Because man, there's a whole lot of junk in that folder. Anyway,
I know that there's there's a real movement on. I keep getting calls all the time to receive free COVID tests.
Oh boy.
And
okay.
So I was thinking, I wonder what's going on here. Anyway, just wanted to say that be aware there, as JT would say in his former police officer days, that be aware of scammers, right?
Beware of the turds, my friend. And I would say that in my retirement days as well. That's for sure. All right. So
you don't look retired.
And something, I don't feel retired. I actually feel pretty good. Retired would insinuate that I'm like the old pair of shoes that got hung up. But yeah, man, I'm my training's going really good. But we'll talk about that when we get to the physical stuff.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So question number 1 from the spiritual side of life. Before we get to the first question, let's talk about when we talked about Psalm 90 earlier this year in one of our other power breaks, and how we talked about making the most of our time.
I think that was back in June. As I look back at my records, I thought, as I was writing this blog and thinking about our podcast too, I thought a little bit more from Psalm 90 wouldn't hurt. Probably come back to it again next summer, because next summer Psalm 90 will be included in our summer series in Psalms. It's some good stuff, though. Of course, most of the Psalms are written by David, but this one happens to be written by Moses himself. So that's what we're looking at today.
Oh, yeah. Yep. When we did that exercise on sitting down and just going with the average person lives to be 70 years old, maybe 80 if they have good genes or whatever you want to say about as a matter of strength or because of strength or however it was that Moses put it. When you sit down and you have people do that exercise, I will tell you, as an adult, it was sobering, but I was amazed at how my kids reacted to it. Like, they really are so far away that when I put that number on it, it seemed like it was too small to them. Like, yeah, like they were like, no. It's sobering to put a number on something like your life. But I also think it does what we're trying to talk about today in the podcast, which is it makes you mindful of the moment. It makes you mindful of preparing to fly away, of knowing that you're going to see God or Jesus is going to come back. Either way, there's going to be a judgment. And are you ready for that? Are you going to be able to look at your Savior and say, I was a good and faithful servant? Or are you going to hear those words that none of us want to hear, which is, I never knew you, which would be the worst, right? But man, that exercise was really
going
good.
through that exercise. Of course, we said just mark down 70 and then subtract your current age. I have less than 6 months.
Less than 6 months.
I'll be 70 next March.
I know, man. So, it was when, and that was one of the things that I actually said when I was talking to the kids. I was like, listen, you think your number is small? Bob's number is like within the year. They're like, what? And I was like, no, that doesn't mean he's going to die. It's just a matter of you you're getting the point that you need to be prepared for it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And Bob's flying away again because of his video. Oh my gosh, this is so good. Anyway, so you want to move on to question number 2, or are we still going to do some discussion?
Let's just talk about question number 1 because it was considering the brevity of life, right?
Yep, for sure.
Okay, well, when we talk about the brevity of life, we go back to Psalm 90 and consider Moses' prayer request in the light of what he has said about the brevity of life. Again, here are the words. It says in Psalm 90, verses 13 through 17, "Return, O Lord, how long? Have pity on your servants, and satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad in all of our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands." The point is, too many times our prayer is all about what we need, and most of the time it's not about our making the most of the interpretation of life in the light of what God is doing in us and around us. Moses is really giving us a challenge in this prayer that he would challenge us to have a desire for a greater God-centered worldview, be able to see things through God's eyes, and to see things from his perspective while we travel through the world, because our time here is brief. It's interesting, I just finished a book, several weeks ago, that was all about writing history. The author was a Christian writer, and he was talking about history is written from a non-Christian perspective, and so we get all upset about things. And he says that people write history based on what their worldview is.
That's right.
And so if our worldview is that God is in control actually we would look at history, the way that the Old Testament narratives, historical narratives, read history. Okay, it's like God is in control. Look at God did that, and look how God saved His people. Look what God is doing. So
Yeah, that's right.
and so that's an interpretation of what's going on in the world, and I think that would be an appropriate prayer to see things, because many times people get their interpretation of what's going on in the world by watching the news.
That's
Okay,
right.
or reading things that are not Christian, and so they get a view of things that everything's catastrophic, and we need to worry about this and that. Hold the phone. We believe that God is in control, and He'll be in control till the very end, and so no problem, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's important for us to keep the perspective. If He's in control, then we need to just sit peacefully in that, because a lot of times we try to take the control, and man, if you can't look around right now and see what kind of a mess is made when people try to take control, there's probably no other time in history where you could look around and be more baffled by it. A lot of realities, like you said, are being rewritten. Like we're going through a process right now of trying to buy a new house, and one of the things, we're not moving back to Florida or anything for the listeners. We're just moving to a different part of North Carolina. That's all. Just trying to get a little bit closer to civilization, because man, Bob, we are in the middle of nowhere. Yupper doodle. Anyway,
Reminds me of a Far Side cartoon.
yeah, that's exactly right. I'm like, man,
that's where the middle of nowhere is.
Yeah, we are in Kansas for sure. So anyway, we've come to the realization through this process that, the people that we are dealing with, as far as inspectors, as far as the other owners, all kinds of things, or the current owners of the house, their reality is different than ours, the way we look at things and the way we perceive things. Perhaps it's not from a Christian view, or perhaps it's from their own experience, or whatever it is, but it's sometimes it's pretty frustrating, because people kind of make up their own reality. Like, does that make sense? Yeah.
No, it does. It does. When a person's not looking at things from a Christian worldview, that God is in control and He has a purpose for everything,
right,
including us. If they aren't looking at life through that, then they're trying to make up things, because they're denying what God has said in His Word. So,
yeah, that's exactly right. And that leads us perfectly to question number 2. So from the mental aspect, do you think it's a bit morbid for us to go through life with a prepare to eject or prepare to fly away kind of attitude or mentality?
It may seem that way. Remember the Apostle Paul, when he was facing the difficulties of being in prison, he writes to the Philippian church, and he says that no matter what happened to him, he knew that for him to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Right. That may seem a little bit morbid. He says because he knew that the day that he would be absent from the body, he would be present with the Lord. So he was not fearful at all. So it's good to remind ourselves of the fact that life here is brief at the best. We want to make the most of this time, but keep in mind some of the things where, as we pointed out in Psalm 39, David says, "My days are just a few handbreadths." That's just a very short period, length there. He says, "Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing they are in turmoil, that is. Man heaps upon wealth and does not know who will gather the things." James says that, we make a big deal about what we're going to do tomorrow or the day after that. But we should say, if the Lord wills, we'll do this or do that.
Right.
And he says, what is your life? It's a mere mist. It appears for a little time and then vanishes. The different times of the year, I think you get it up there too, the mist or the fog sets in. I'm sure that in the mountains it happens. Of course, it happens during the spring and the fall here in Florida because of the water in the bay. But nevertheless, by the mid-morning, it's gone, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right. I think as a police officer, I really had to learn to deal with the stages of life. And what I mean by that is, we were always called to somebody's death if it was not attended by a physician, right? So, on average, when I was on patrol, I would investigate or be involved in the investigation of probably 5 to 7 deaths a week, somewhere around there.
Wow.
Well,
Really?
I mean, Largo's, it's a retirement community, so, I hate to say it, a lot of people die a lot down there. And then, you add to that we were right by Largo Medical Center. But the point that I'm trying to make is, a lot of people I know now are almost kept away from the reality of your life is short. And I don't think that's to their benefit, because I don't think they take advantage of the time that they have here.
Right.
Yeah, I think that they look back on it eventually when they're faced with their own mortality, and they come to the realization that, wow, I didn't really take this as seriously as I should. And then if it comes before they make that realization, then they're not prepared to fly away, are they?
They really aren't, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why God says, we need to be prepared. That's what Moses says in the book of Psalm 90.
Yep, that's right. So question number 3, from the physical side of life. So let's talk about pre-workout meals. Man, and I will tell you that I know people that are in every different category of pre-workout meal attitudes that you can come up with.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think the best thing is to eat prior to workout, Bob?
Oh, just a handful of peanuts, but no.
A handful of peanuts. You are kidding. That's it. I can't finish this show. Yeah.
From what I've read, it depends on the workout and the time prior to the workout. The chart says 4 hours before a standard workout, there should be a mix, which is a mixture of strength training and cardio. Make it a low glycemic meal or a bar with some fat and protein. In other words,
That's
if you
right.
get too glycemic on it, it upsets your stomach. 3 hours prior, less fat but more protein. 2 hours prior, more carbs in the mix of high and low glycemic index. And 1 hour, some high glycemic index and low fiber. So it does matter what you eat, and it's good to look at this, what you're putting into your body prior to, because the worst thing that can happen is have gut problems as you go to work out.
Man, we've all been there. We've all been on that run, and you're like, oh man, there had better be a bathroom close to me.
Yeah, and that's not any fun.
No.
And so it does mean that you experiment with these things. And so when we talk about low glycemic, another things that are going to burn slowly, and
That's right.
Make sure that we get enough of that and some protein in. So of course it takes. It's okay to sometimes in shorter and easier cardio workouts to exercise in a fasted state, but that's not recommended very often, because you can really put yourself in a deficit, because if you're not fueling your body will start to look for fuel in itself.
I was going to say it sounds awful, but the reality is it starts to eat itself. Because it's going to find what it needs someplace. And if you have extra on your body, it's going to take that.
And I was reading also that there's a tendency, especially among high endurance athletes, is to not eat very much, because they look at it as an opportunity to also lose weight while they're working out. So
that does not happen. That's not the way your body works. No.
Yeah, it actually is self-defeating. Anyway, it takes discipline to really look at what you're eating, how you're eating, and when you're eating, and develop a plan, and then follow the plan. As we always say, as it does take discipline makes the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 216.
And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for our answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Quick word for the power of time management goes along with what we've been talking about today, that life is just brief at the best, so why not make the most of it? Check out the book, Power of Time Management at bobbrubaker.com.
Thank you for joining us for the Power Break Podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast, and check out news, show notes, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at bobbrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break Podcast.